I'm talking with Peter Manuel, the head of Flag Australia, who's a farmer from South Australia, and I'm David Flint. It's the time when we're still in the middle of the coronavirus, the Wuhan coronavirus, which came to us from China. And we're in a situation where things are not looking too good for the country. I've just written a piece for Spectator Australia, which you can easily Google. Spectator Australia, David Flint. It's called Comfort the Comfortable. There used to be a saying, which is used particularly in America, and it was comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And the American media took it up. Comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. The theme of my piece is that instead of that, the politicians are applying something else. They're applying comfort the comfortable and afflict the rest of us. Because really what's happening is that about 2 million in the public sector out of the frontline people, including our elected public servants, the politicians, they're all not being affected at all. Right. None of the pain of this crisis is falling on them. It's falling on the rest of the population. And that seems to be unfair. And as you'll see from that piece, I think that the politicians have mismanaged the running of the crisis, and in particular in relation to the lockdown, which is so unnecessary and is not really achieving anything, and which goes against world's best practice. And in that regard, I think I should emphasize that there is a great lack of confidence in the country, in the present class of politicians in this country, great lack of confidence. In fact, I find that when I ask people, I speak quite a bit around the country, when I ask people, can you identify a problem in this country which, if it weren't created by the politicians, has been made significantly worse by them? And people do find it very difficult to do that. There is a great dissatisfaction. Something is terribly wrong about the governance of this country. We're in the middle of this crisis. We shouldn't forget that this followed another, that is the drought and the bushfire. The bushfires, particularly in Eastern Australia and going into South Australia. The bushfires were a terrible disaster, and the politicians shouldn't escape criticism from that. And on that, I'd like to ask Peter, what is your feeling now in retrospect about the bushfires and the laws and rules which apply to you, imposed by the politicians in relation to the bush on your property and the bush on the roads? Peter.
Yeah, thanks very much, David, for giving me this opportunity again to speak. I, like many others, are very, very worried about the situation now that the bushfires have gone and we're starting to get some rain and so forth. Is anything really going to change? I think the green agenda will be really, really pushing, and I don't think we're going to get much change. If we have a look, especially here in South Australia over the last 50 years, the amount of scrub, low-density bush that has been planted around this state is an absolute disgrace. It's all for, habitat. Well, all is this going to do is their little habitat is going to go up in smoke, and what also it's going to do is going to cause more emissions. So, they're trying to tell us about climate change and climate change causing bushfires. That's a load of garbage. It's the environment we're creating because of the green agenda. We can't even clear our roadside vegetation, David. You want to see, actually, when you come over to South Australia, I'd like to show you quite a few things, but you need to have a look at our roadsides and have a look at the broken branches, the build-up of debris, and we get massive fines if we clean up our roadsides. It's absolutely disgusting. So that's going to be interesting to see whether government changes legislation, native vegetation acts and so on, that we can actually clean up our roadsides. And this so-called habitat, these branches that are lying down and all the rest of it, these little lizards and little creatures and everything like that, they're going to crawl up a bit of bark on a live tree or whatever. We're not saying cut down trees and all the rest of it, but we need to clear our roadsides from all this broken down stuff. It's just building up. And if we're not allowed to do it, the government should be held responsible and the bureaucrats responsible, and not so much responsible, they should be held liable because they are making very, very unsafe regulation and legislation. And this needs to be looked at big time, David. And if I can just mention briefly about the Kangaroo Island fires in Flinders Chase back in December, where we saw that there was a loss of 2 lives, thousands and thousands of stock losses, homes and businesses. And there was a farmer that could have contained that fire when it was only burning the size of a football oval. And because of red tape and ridiculous bureaucracy, stopped him from doing that. And have a look what ended up. We had ended up with a complete disaster, an absolute disaster. And, you know, things really need to be looked at. And I can tell you now, if we don't get any change, it just shows you that these politicians are listening to absolute evil people, as far as I'm concerned, behind closed doors. David.
Peter, are you saying that on the island there was a fire and a farmer wanted to get rid of that fire to extinguish it, and he wasn't allowed to? Peter.
Allegedly, he made a phone call to the CFS. Allegedly, they never got back to him. By that time, it was too late. The fire was out of control. And as I said, it was burning the size of a football oval. He could have got in and contained that fire. This particular farmer knows what he's doing when it comes to containing fires. And it was the bureaucracy and the red tape that hasn't allowed to contain that fire. And I think it's absolutely disgusting. There's some heads that really need to roll here big time. In actual fact, people can Google KI farmer stopped on his bulldozer and have a look at it. He's talking there. He reckons it's absolutely ridiculous what goes on. And, you know, we see that over there, they're not allowed to get into national parks and clear vegetation and so on. These national parks now are just a tinderbox for fire. And it's not going to protect their native animals and all the rest. What it's going to do is going to destroy a lot more farmland and vegetation and national parks and all these so-called native animals and endangered species. It's absolutely ludicrous, David, and we really need to learn something out of this. And if I can just briefly mention also the King Lake fires back in 2009 in Victoria. There was a guy that cleared his property. He got fined, I think it was up to $100,000. And his property stayed safe. And he warned his neighbours to do the same, and they didn't. But his property stayed safe. And he ended up getting nearly $100,000 fine. You've got to ask, where are we going in this country, David?
Peter, it's extraordinary. I know, for example, in New South Wales, the Carr government, Bob Carr, is blamed for locking up the national parks. But they have stayed locked up since the Carr government, under successive governments, and they haven't done the necessary cleaning up that you have to do if you're going to get rid of all the fuel. And we had vast amounts of fuel in the forest, and that's what really exacerbated the fires. You can't stop fires, but they're going to get worse if you don't clean up, particularly the national parks. But you've told me also, you've got the situation in South Australia where you have to keep a certain type of bush on your properties, and it's called kerosene bush. It's called kerosene bush for, I think, pretty obvious reasons. Could you tell me about that, Peter?
Certainly can, David. It's Acacia paradoxia. is the botanical name. As you said, kerosene bush, highly inflammable, and we are not allowed to clear it off our properties here in South Australia. And I would think that just up the road from my property, there'd be a good 30 acres of it. Nothing grows underneath it. It is just an absolute mess. It really is. We should have bulldozers in there, and we should be bulldozing this stuff out, and we should be planting beautiful grasses and trees. Have nice trees, majestic trees spaced at, at a reasonable distance apart so they can grow to their full potential. But this stuff is just a huge fire hazard. And it's funny because I get around the place a fair bit, and I was helping a farmer, and I won't say the particular area, with his cattle. And this woman near him come up to my ute, and I said, "Oh, g'day, how are you?" And she said, "Oh, yes, I'm good. I was just about to introduce myself." And she said, "Oh, yes, I know who you are. You're that flag bloke." And I said, "Oh, well, that's nice." And she said, "Humans are plagues." And I said, "Plagues?" I said, "I haven't got a problem with humans, actually." Now, this woman is a real environmentalist. And I believe that there's a real sinister thing going on here with this so-called environmentalism. They're trying to portray that, they care about the environment. Well, I don't think they do, because they wouldn't be planting all this scrub all over the place. So not only the animals get burnt out, but also the humans. So I'm starting to wonder a little bit what these people are really about, especially when I get told that humans are plagues. David.
Peter, this country has always had enormous potential. And I think our predecessors realized that when they started on a vigorous program of water harvesting. Our predecessors were building dams all over the country, and they were making the country so much more productive. That's what we really need. We have wonderful land, but we need the water moved around the country. And that was happening, but that suddenly stopped by the time of the Hawke government, and the Hawke government stopped it, and subsequent governments refused to follow. Now there's some motions towards building a dam or two, but the process takes so long. I think it takes several times the time that it's now taking in the United States to get approval for new developments. We seem to be still being held back. There's talk that once this virus is gone, the country can be restored and we can go back to being a great and productive country. But I can't really see that with the present system of governance of this country, because the politicians do not seem to be taking decisions for the benefit of all the people. They're taking decisions for the benefit of minorities. They're obsessed with the myth of global warming, and they seem to be particularly impressed and influenced by a foreign communist government. They bent over backwards in relation to handing over and approving the sale of all sorts of things, even a strategic port, to entities controlled by the Communist Party of China. This does not seem to me to suggest that our politicians are acting in the best interest of the country. So I think on a final point, what I would like to say is what is very important is that at some stage, and very soon, Australians should take back your country.
David, I couldn't agree more. And just one thing I'd like to ask you, with this inquiry that Scott Morrison is talking about into the virus from China, are we going to get a truthful inquiry, David?
Well, I think it was a mistake. I think that Xi Jinping has played our Prime Minister and the Western leaders like a fiddle. By putting it into the World Health Organization, the control of this investigation is under the control of those who are really puppets of the Beijing communists. And it will be run in such a way that it will do them no harm. We shouldn't only be investigating. We basically know what happened. We know that the communist government behaved deceitfully, that they hid from the rest of the world what was really happening. And while they stopped people getting out of Wuhan into the rest of China, they allowed and indeed encouraged large numbers of people to go around the world, thus spreading the disease. Now, this is a terrible thing. We know all this. We don't need an investigation to tell us this. What we need are to get reparations, to get damages. And that is what Mr. Morrison and the Western leaders should be doing, rather than this inquiry, which is not going to achieve anything and will whitewash the communists. I don't see it being of any advantage at all. I can't see the point of doing it within the World Health Organization, which is a puppet organization now of the Beijing communists.
So I totally agree. I totally agree with that, David. And we've got to cut ties with the UN, a non-elected dictatorship. We've got to govern in our own right. And if Scott Morrison doesn't kickstart, and we've said it before, our manufacturing, our industry, things are not going to change at all. And how are we going to pay this massive debt off? How are we going to do it if we don't kickstart the manufacturing, the industry, and let the mum and dad farmers of Australia actually farm? Because if agriculture is doing well, everything is doing well. And we need to well and truly protect our food security, because if this ever happens again, we're in a better place.
Peter, thank you so much. You're so right. And to the viewers, what we should always say, and I think is the important thing, Australians, take back your country. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Thank you.